All right, this is One Last Midnight. Welcome back to another episode of Farthest Frontier. In today's episode, I have 10 very useful tips that if you didn't know them already, you should probably start using them right away. Some buildings in Farthest Frontier bring up an overlay, removing the grass and the brush so that you can easily see where you're going to place your building. But not all buildings give you that overlay. You can easily toggle on the overlay to be able to see through the grass and the brushes to be able to help you place any building that you would like. It doesn't matter which overlay you use, but I like the fertility one because it makes it look cleaner. Roads are extremely important in builder games because it helps your citizens move from point A to point B more quickly. And placing roads exactly where you want them to be sometimes can be a chore. For perfectly straight roads, hold down the shift key so that you can have your road either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. And you no longer have to have those weird curvy roads in your village anymore. Of course, unless you want to. If you happen to be in a very bushy area and you're having difficulty seeing your road that you're about to place down, remember tip 1, turn on your overlays, and you'll be able to see that road nice and clearly. All production buildings require some sort of resource. And by default, the resource icons are already on your screen, with fancy little green arrows telling you what their quantity is. 1 arrow being low, 3 arrows being high. But wouldn't it be nice to see the actual value of that resource? If you press the F4 key, you can actually toggle on the value of those resources, so that you can see the quantity inside of each resource that you're about to harvest. It'll also tell you the percentage that you're getting from shoals of fish, as well as quantity of deer, and also the amount that is in an ore deposit. Like this gold ore has 2,628. This information is incredibly valuable when you're setting up your production lines. I may not want to go after this iron resource, because it has significantly less than this iron resource. While it's a little bit cumbersome looking at the values all the time, remember that you can easily toggle these values by hitting the F4 key. Off, default, which is just the icon, and values. Life in the village is peaceful and idyllic, as long as there's not a raid going on. Your villagers are going about their business, but you can't tell what they're doing. Well, unless of course they're unhappy. They're happy to tell you about all of their problems, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? Luckily, you can toggle more information about your villagers by using the F3 key, which will bring up their name and what they're currently doing. That way you no longer have to wonder what your villagers are up to, because you can see what they're doing at any moment in time. By default, your villager status will only be set to show an icon if they're unhappy. But if you toggle F3, you can see their detailed information, or you can even shut their information completely off. I really like knowing what my villagers are up to, and this way I can keep track of those pesky villagers to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Gathering resources are a necessity to any building game, and Farthest Frontier is not any different. In order to gather resources, you can harvest them by using the H key or clicking on the harvest button. You'll see the items to be harvested are already checked, and you can select and unselect any one that you would like. Harvesting those items is as easy as dragging your mouse, selecting an area, and they'll be highlighted white. But what if you selected way too much? Well, in order to deselect, all you have to do is draw that same box, but make sure that you hold down the shift key, and it'll deselect the area in which you selected previously. Remember, don't overburden your laborers, especially in the beginning game, because you don't have enough to go around. It's better to keep them focused on a very small area so that you can produce resources more quickly. Placing any building is done from the build menu by either hitting the B key or pressing on the build menu icon and selecting the building in which you want to place down. All buildings have an arrow, and this arrow indicates how villagers will exit the building. It's really important when you're placing a building to make sure that your villagers can leave on a road. Having your villagers leave outside of a road will only slow them down and make them less efficient. You can rotate any building by hitting the tab key, and you can see where the arrow will be placed so that you can position your building so the exit is next to the road. Remember, a happy villager is a villager who's able to leave their building. I mean, that only is common sense, right? Land desirability in Farthest Frontier is highly important. So much so, they gave you an entire overlay dedicated to desirability. Your villager's housing cannot evolve from one state to the next without at least some level of desirability. In this case, the shelter requires a desirability of 30 in order to be able to upgrade, as well as several other things. If you look at a homestead requires 65 to be able to upgrade to the next level. And a large house requires a desirability of 85 in order for it to be able to evolve. So it's extremely important to pay attention to desirability when placing buildings down. Make sure that you place buildings that produce a very high level of undesirability away from your housing. Consider it an industrial area like other city builder type games. Make sure you have an area dedicated for these type of industrial buildings so that they only pollute one specific area with high undesirability, saving your housing from being affected by those undesirable locations. A clean village is a happy village. The villagers in Farthest Frontier are dirty. Yeah, you didn't know they were dirty, but they are. Each one of your housing will have some sort of waste that the villagers produce throughout the year. In order to get rid of this waste, you're going to need a composter. The composter can be found in the buildings menu under resources and is accessible relatively early in the game. You are required to have a stockyard and also a saw pit before you can put down the composter. And the composter itself produces a large radius of undesirability. So if you followed my tip earlier, you should have some sort of industrial zone to be able to house the composter. Too much waste accumulating in your shelters will attract rats, and rats will bring disease. And that's one reason why the compost yard is incredibly important to have. The other reason is the compost pile. Once the compost is made, you can then use the compost to fertilize any crop fields. Crop fields have a fertility, and there's several ways that you can bring up that fertility, but one of the easiest ways is to use the compost created in the compost yard to boost up the fertility of your farm fields. It takes a lot of time for compost to generate, so make sure that you get this building in very early in your game so that you can have compost ready for your farm fields somewhere around Season 3 or 4. As you know, food is highly important in Farthest Frontier. That's the only thing that's going to keep your settlers alive is food. Well, of course, shelter, firewood, clothing, all that other stuff, but food is the main thing that your people want. And food is highly abundant. But did you know that the blueberry bush is the only food resource that can be transplanted? There's actually an icon here that says it'll allow you to move this bush. I highly recommend that you pause the game, find all of your blueberry bushes, and then plant the blueberry bushes somewhere in the radius of the forager shack. This is extremely helpful in the beginning of the game because you can consolidate some food very close to the forager shack. It doesn't require anything other than a little bit of building time from your builders in order to relocate the berry bushes. The best time to do this is in spring when the blueberry bushes have berries on them so you can see them easier, and transplant as many as you possibly can within that first year. In no time at all, workers will go out, dig up the blueberry bushes, bring them back, plant them down, and you will have blueberry bushes that are consolidated right next to the forager shack, giving you a little bit of that extra food boost early on in the game. I'm not sure if you realize it or not, but wildlife inside of Farthest Frontier is hungry. The wolves will happily eat your people. Villagers happily eat deers and cow, and deer are happy to eat some, if not all, of your crops. Those dirty little bastards. And that's why protecting your crop field with fences is so important. Under the buildings menu, under walls and roads, you'll find fence. And you can put a fence around your crop field so that the deer won't eat it. Make sure that you have at least one gate so that the farmers could get in or out. Once your fence is complete, you'll no longer have to worry about wildlife wandering in and eating up all of your harvest. Don't make the mistake that I did, which is not putting down a fence immediately. Make sure your fences go in right away, otherwise you'll lose a lot of your farming produce to wildlife. All right, well, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed these tips on Farthest Frontier. We'll have more coming out soon. If you haven't already, hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Would love to have you in the community. If you want to follow me on any of my social media, you can find the links in the description below. And make sure to hit that notification bell. That way you know when I go live and when I post new videos. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.